Well, today's daf is daf Samach Beis, and we'll pick it up here on the bottom of Samach Aleph Amid Beis. And the Gemara has a contradiction in two psukim in terms of the mitzvah of Tnufa. Who's actually waving the carbon? Is it the Bailim? Is it the Kohen? And to reconcile these two psukim, the Gemara says HaKetzad. This is mamish at the end of Samach Aleph Amid Beis. Kohen meniach yodov tachas yidei bailim umenif. So it's really a partnership of both the owner of the carbon as well as the Kohen, and both limud and both psukim are correct. And the Kohen is going to put his hands underneath the hands of the Yisrael, and in that way, they're both actually implementing the Tnufa. And this leads to a whole discussion in the commentaries because we have a halacha of chatzitza, and the hands of the Kohen are below the hands of the Yisrael, of the Bala Korban, and therefore there's no direct contact between the hands of the Kohen and, let's say, the Kli for Bikurim, right? There's a tena Kli that has the fruits and and whatever else you have to bring as Bikurim. But in any event, so we're now on Daf Samach Beis, and the Brisa says that Ketzero Seminiach Emuram al Pisa Sayat. So now we're talking about what's called Shalmei Yochid, and when a Yochid brings a carbon shlamim, then he needs Tnufa, and the Tnufa is going to be a twofold Tnufa. Number one, it's going to be on the Emurim that have to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and number two, it's going to have to be done on the Chaz of Shok that's given over to the Kohen. And Al Pisas Hayad, so the Pisas Hayad is this part of the hand, the palm of the hand, and the Chaz of Shok Al Lehem. So it seems like the Chaz of Shok is on top of the Murim. Ubechol Mokom Sheyesh Lechem HaLechem Ilamal. Now there's Tnufa also in Karbonos of Lechem, like for example, the Shtei Lechem that's brought with the Kivsei Atzeres on Chag Hashvuos, or for example, you could talk about the Shalmi Nazir. When the Nazir completes his Nazir, he has to bring a carbon shlomim. Or a person who's saved, he's spared from danger, he has to bring a carbon toda. And in these karbonos, the karbonos have to be accompanied by lechem, by, let's say, for example, in the case of a toda, 30 lechamim that are matzah and 10 lechamim that are chametz. And now the Bryce is telling us that you have to have the lechem on top of the other portions, meaning you're going to have, let's say, the chaz v'shok, you're going to have the emurim, and on top of that, you'll have the lechem. So the Gemara says, Heicha, where do we know this from? Amrav Papa, from Miluim, because during the Miluim of the Mishkan, the pasuk says in Vayikra Perek Ches, Umisala matzos shalifnei Hashem lakach chalas matzah achas v'chalas lechem shemen achas for a kik echad. And then it says, Vayosem ala chalovim v'al shokayimin. So with regard to the chalos, which are in a sal, the Torah describes them as going on top of the chalovim, those are the emurim that are burnt on the Mizbeach, and on top of the shok, which is the part that's designated for the Kohen. My timer. Now, the Gemara wants to know if this is really a shall I say, a convincing argument. Can you really derive this conclusion from the pasuk? If you're going to tell me that because the pasuk says, Shok hatruma v'chazei hatnufa al ishei hachalavim yaviu lahanif tnufa, well, guess what? It sounds like in this pasuk that for the purpose of the mitzvah of tnufa, it would seem that the chaz v'shok are on top of the chalavim. Vaksiv, but that we know is not so. The pasuk says, "Esachelev esachazi yivienu," and that indicates that, on the contrary, the chalavim are on top of the matana of the chaz of Ashok. Abai wants to reconcile this contradiction. Ahu demaisi le kohen mi beis hamitbachayim. There was a place in the Migdash which is called the Beis HaMikdashayim. That's where they would cut up after the Shechita, and they were going to bring the Emurim and the Chalavim on the Mizbech. That's where they cut it up. And what happened was that the Kohen brings the parts that have to be burnt on the Mizbech from the Beis HaMitbachayim, Virami Le. So what he does is, first he puts the emurim on top of the chaz v'shok, and then, after doing so, he turns everything upside down. And where does he put it? He puts it into the hands of a second Kohen. So there are two Kohanim that are participating here, and really what we have in effect is that the chalavim and evarim are on top of the chaz v'shok at the time of the tenufa. And the first pasuk that we said, where the chaz v'shok was on top, that's also correct, because that was for the first kohen. So basically, you have we call it in modern Hebrew shituf pula. You have a participation of both kohen. The Gemara is not happy about this. V'aksiv vayasimu es hachalavim al hachazos. I mean, it seems almost crystal clear here that the chaza, which is called in plural the chazos, is underneath the chalavim, and the chalavim are on top. And why is it that you're telling me that the first kohen has the chalavim on the bottom and the chaz v'shok on top? I mean, that's against the pasuk. And the answer is hahu da'yov le'kohen achrina. That pasuk is talking about the second kohen, and the second kohen will enochinami have the chalavim on top of the chaz v'shok. The first kohen had the chaz v'shok on top of the chalavim, but he flipped it over when he gave it to the second kohen. The Azalu Maktole, the second kohen, is the one who's going to bring the evarim and the chalavim onto the Mizbeach HaKtorah. The Torah is therefore teaching us that to be in and shlosha kohanim, b'shum d'chsiv b'rov am hajas melech. So at the end of the day, the avoda is going to be performed by three different kohanim, and we're not sure why they need a third kohen. It seems like the first kohen put the chaz v'shok on top, and the second kohen had the emurim on top. After he flipped it over, why do we need a third kohen? So in this note that I have, he quotes a Rambam that it doesn't really mean that three Kohanim actually did the tenufa, but there was one Kohen who, as you recall, had to put his hands underneath the bailim, the owner of the korban. Because we learned from the psukim that both the bailim and the Kohen have to participate in the tenufa. So that would mean that you have the first two Kohanim with the different positions of the emurim versus and then you have the Israel who's putting his hands underneath the emurim and the chaz v'shok to do the tenufa, and then there's a third Kohen apparently who puts his hands underneath the hands of the bailim. Let's go on. But it's fascinating to me. I just want to point out that Barov Am Hajas Melech, which is usually halacha in Tefillah, in Kriyas Torah, Kriyas Megillah, anything that requires a recital of psukim, so we want to get as many people as possible involved, or if you have a public shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like for example, Kiddusha, where we say Kadosh, 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 then Barov Am Hajas Melech. But all of these are dimensions of Shevach and praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now we're applying Barov HaMajis to the mitzvah of Tnufa, which seems to imply that the mitzvah of Tnufa somehow also glorifies the Almighty. He adds a comment over here, which is very interesting. He says that we could see from this Gemara, according to Rabbeinu Gershon, that you can accomplish Barov Hajas Melech with three people, because there are only three Kohanim involved, and yet it's called Barovam. We go on. Ushtei alechem ushnei kvos gives atzeres. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, v'heinif hakohen osam alechem habikurim. If you take the pasuk literally, and we're talking at, it's a little confusing because the word bikurim here in this context is referring to the shtei alechem of Chag HaShvuos, not to the bikurim of the first fruits that are brought. In any event, it says al lechem habikurim, that somehow they take the two kvasim that have to be brought with the shtei alechem, and they place the lambs on top of the shtei alechem in order to achieve tnufa, behenif. It would seem, if we take this pasuk literally, that you put the kvasim on top of the lechem, because it says ve'enif hakohen osam al lechem, etc. Is Talmud Lomar? There's another pasuk, which I think is the very next pasuk, if I'm not mistaken, and it says al shnei kvasim. I don't get it. So now it says al shnei kvasim, which means that the lechem goes on the shnei kvasim. Before that, we said that the shnei kvasim go on the lechem. So the Brisa continues to try to work this, iron all these glitches out. I al shnei kvasim, if we're going to take literally the requirement to put the shtei lechem upon the lambs, the shnei kvasim, is yachol lechem al gabi kvasim. Talmud Lomar, it says al lechem habikurim. Al lechem habikurim, right? That was the pasuk that we started with here in this Brisa. And al lechem habikurim seems to indicate that the lambs are on top of the lechem. Not the way we see it here in this pasuk, that the lechem is on top of the kvasim. Nishtakel hakosuv. In other words, the pasuk is giving you two options over here. And Eini Yodea im alechem al kvasim agabi alechem. It can't be that there are two options. I mean, this is a korban tzibur that's brought once a year on Chag HaShavuos, so you got to know how to do the tnufa, what's on top of what. And we have a steer in the psukim. What we're going to do is we're going to find another parsha in which there's lechem together with another korban, and we're going to figure out in that parsha where does the lechem belong. Is it lamala? If it is, then afkan lamala. And heicha, where do we find it? Amar Papa b'miluim. In the miluim, we find that the pasuk says uvisalam atzos shalifnei Hashem. We read it before, etc., etc. And then it says matzah achas v'chalas lechem shemen achas vayosem al hachalovim v'al shokayimin. So that means al on top of, not like Rebbe who holds that the word al has a different meaning. But now we're going to the sheet of the Chacham, that al means literally on top, and therefore the lechem has to go on top. And that's based on the B'chol Mokum Lechel Lamala is afkan, here too, lechem lamala. However, here we have a dissenting view of Rabbi Yossi ben Hameshulam Omer, Umani Makayim al Shnei Kvasim Lahotzi Shiva. Now, on Shavuos, there were two sets of lambs that were brought, kvasim. There was the Shnei Kivsei Atzeres that were brought together with the Shtel Lechem, and then there were another seven Kvasim that were brought on Chag HaShavuos, and they're also brought in this whole process together with the lechem, the shtel lechem. So now, what do I do with the pasuk? Says Rabbi Yossi of al shnei kvasim, and we're saying that when it says in the pasuk that the kvasim are on top of the lechem, and here it says al shnei kvasim, is lihotzi shiva. So it's to the exclusion of shiva. So when it says al shnei kvasim, we're referring to the shnei kvasim, that dafka, the shnei kvasim, that's the only carbon that requires tenufa. But the other seven kvasim, which are karbanos ola, do not require tenufa. So lahotzi shiva means to exclude those sheva kvasim from tenufa. Chanina ben Chagnoel, he has a third opinion, is meniach shtei lechem ben yarchoseim shel kvasim. This is a very demeaning kind of thing, but you put the shtei lechem between the thighs of the kvasim, umenif, and then you wave everything together. So it's like the two legs are closed onto the lechem. Nimtzu b'kaim shnei mikros halal. Right now we have at least fulfilled both psukim. Lechem al gabi kvasim, ukvasim al gabi halechem. And basically it means that we're sort of juggling it in a way that you could do both. But Rebbe says this is a disgrace. Omer Rebbe, lifnei melech basav adam enosim kain. You would never do this and give a gift to the melech basav adam by squeezing it in between the thighs of a lamb. Is lifnei melech malchem loch b'kadosh baruch hu also kain. Are you going to do it now in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom? Ella, but rather beiniach zeh b'tzad zeh umenif. So the word al does not mean on top of, according to Rebbe, but rather next to each other. In fact, Rebbe Litame, this is Rebbe Shita elsewhere. Tiyomar al bisamuch. The word al means bisamuch, means near, not on, but near. Tisanya, we learned in a brisa. And how I think we're talking about, if not mistaken, the lechem apanim would have to be accompanied by the Shnei Bezichim of Shemen, of Levona. Is it Asato Mareches Levona Zaka? So it says that you put the Levona al Mahamareches. Rebbe Omer al, what does the word al mean? Besamuch means near it. And how does Rebbe know this? Ata Omer al besamuch, Einu el al mamish. If you're going to say that the Levona has to be placed on top, directly on top of the lechamim, is shu omer v'sakosa ala oron ve'ala paroches. Right? These are the parts of the migdash, like the curtains that would cover over the Aron Kodesh. And it says al Aron. We cannot possibly take that literally and say that al means that it's on top of. I mean, the whole purpose of the paroches was to separate the Kodesh Kadoshim from the Kodesh, from the Heichal. Hefi Omer al b'som, we see that the word al means next to it and not on top of it. So when the Torah says that Levona has to be placed al, right, each of the two sdarim of 6 and 6 lechamim of the lechem apanim, it doesn't mean on top of each of these two stacks of 6, but rather next to them. And here too, with regard to the tnufa of the lechamim together with the kvasim, it doesn't mean al, but rather it means bisamach. Now, the Mishnah says that how do you do Tnufa? Molich umevi. Mala, male umori. Amr Chia bar Abba, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Molich umevi lemisha ruchos shalom. Mailu morid lemisha shamayim varetz shalom. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Molich umevi means this and this. That's what I think. Not only that, but you need the ruchos, which are the four directions of the world, north, east, west, and south. And we're trying to say through this tnufa that everything belongs to Hashem. The four directions of the world, my heart, and my kavanah to move forward. Mala umorid, he's got to pick it up and put it down. Lemisha shamayim v'aretz shalom, indicating that God is the God who owns the heavens and God is the God who owns the earth. However, b'marava masnu hachi, they had a different brisa in Marav in Eretz Yisrael, and Molech umevi kidei latzar ruchos ros. So the winds bring what's called ruchos ros, and we have to ward off these winds by doing a molech umevi. And now, why do we go maila umorid? Kidei latzar tlolim roim. Now, tal is dew, and tlolim are dews in plural. And apparently some of the, some of the tal can be destructive. Now, I'm not sure if we take this physically or this is something more symbolic and spiritual. Let's just see if he adds anything here. The waving demonstrates our faith that in the merit of our keeping his Torah, God will spare us from harmful winds and harmful dews. D-E-W-S. So this is not foreign to us. I mean, this is familiar to us from Nanuim of the Lulav.
Right.
Okay. Amr Rav Yossi bar Rav Avin. This is beautiful. Tnufa is not essential. The korban is kosher even without tnufa, and therefore gets the status of shiore mitzvah. Shiore mitzvah ma'akvim esa puranis. Look at the power inherent even in shiore mitzvah. These are residual parts of the mitzvah that are secondary, not primary, and yet look at the power that they have to prevent punishment. Ta'tnufa shiore mitzvah ve otzeres ruchos ros utzlon roim. Unbelievable power of shiore mitzvah. How much more so the real mitzvah, the real McCoy, meaning the rest of the avodah. Why? Because lulav, we say mina agbe nafik be. Once he lifts up the lulav, he's yotze. He doesn't have to do the nanuim in all the 6 directions. And yet, if he goes and he does so, then those nanuim will ward off these, these ruchos ros, these harmful creatures or winds. Rav Achbar Yaakov, mamtile umaisile. Wow. In other words, as he was doing the nanuim in the lulav, when he put it out and brought it back in, he would show people how he did it publicly, and then he would add the following curse, so to speak, Gira bi'ene de sitma, an arrow into the eyes of the Satan. Now, that's not such a good idea, I think, to start messing around with the Satan. I don't know. V'lav milsi, and therefore forget about the whole story about Rav Acha bar Yaakov, just erase it. Mishum the osilas gurebe, you want to challenge the Satan, you know what? That's going to stimulate him to try to prove what I could do for you. You're going to say, well, the Satan is not able to trip me and trap me and so forth and so on. The Satan will say, I'll prove it to you. I'll show you up. Like in the case of Eov. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. There's only one thing that fits the description of Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur, and that's the two kvasim of Chag HaShavuos. Tu'unim Tnufa liachas Shutvasim Kvot Shehem. Divrei Rebbe. So it seems that Rebbe is of the opinion that the normal halacha of Tnufa that applies to Shlomim in general, which is the Tnufa the Imurim plus the Tnufa of the Chaz V'Shok, that doesn't apply in the case of Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. And therefore, Tnufasam Kimot Shehem, says Rebbe, you know what? You're not going to take apart the animal, and we're doing this during the lifetime of the animal. Just one second. See, I have to go back to my chart. I think this is this Liachar Mosa, Liachar Shchita? Just one second. Yeah, this is Liachar Shchita. So after Shchita, right, we take the two Shlomim that were shechted, and we're going to bring them as, onto the Mizbeach. And we're going to do Tnufa, not on the Chaz V'Shok, but on the entire animal, the entire lamb as whole. And the Chacham reject this, B'Chaz V'Shok. The same Tnufa that applies to any Korban Shlomim will apply here also in the cases of Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. What lies at the root of this machlokes? Amalei Rav Chizda Rav Hamnuna, Amalei Rav Huna Rav Chizda, Bidon Mina Umina, or Bidon Mina V'Yukvi Asra Kamifli. Right. So when you derive B from A, do you take also the whole kit and caboodle, all the halachas of A? And that's called Dom Mine Umine. Or do we say no? When you derive B from A, you derive whatever you have to derive, and the rest is governed and ruled by the local laws of B. It's not like you, domino means you take everything as a package deal, leaving nothing behind, whereas don mina v'uki be'asra means that, okay, we'll derive the original halacha, and now the makabel, that part that was received will be ruled by its own local rules. Let's see how this works out. Rabbanan Savri domino mina ma zivchei shalmei yachid to unim tnufa liachar shchita af zivchei shalmei tzivatunim tnufa liachar shchita. Fine. So that we know, and we can derive the requirement of tnufa in the Shnei Kfasim of Chag HaShavuos from the general halacha of what's it called, Shalmei Yachid, and we require Tnufa Liachar Shchita. Good. Now we Mina. Mina means we go one step further in that comparison. Ma Hasam, just like in a case of Shalmei Yachid, is B'Chaz V'Shok, meaning that we do the Tnufa with the Chaz V'Shok, is Afhochanami B'Chaz V'Shok. So here too, with regard to Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur, is Chaz V'Shok. Whose sheet is that? That's the Chachamim sheet. That's Rabban. So again, the bottom line is that according to Rabbanon, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur, like Shalmei Yachid, require Tnufa with chaz v'shok. The Rebbe, Sava Domino Mikbias, Ma Zivche Shalmitz Yochid, to Unim Trufel Yachar Shchita that we have, Af Zivche Shalmitz Vi Uki Beasru. Now we're going to take this law of Tnufa that we derive from Shalmi Yochid and we're going to put it into the context of Shalmi Tzibur. And we're going to say the following distinction. Hasam, in the case of Shalmi Yochid, who the Chaz v'Shok, there's a difference between the meat and the Chaz v'Shok. The meat is mutter, and it's mutter, by the way, not only to the Kohen, but even to the Bailim, and the Chaz v'Shok is also. The Bailim have to give the Chaz v'Shok as a gift to the Kohen. Af hachak moshehem, avol hachak moshehem. In other words, uki ve'asra means now we go into the local requirements and dinim that rule and govern the shalmei tzibur. And that is k'mochein michayim. Now, why is that so obvious? Just 1 second. Okay, so again, is there a requirement of tnufa in shalmei tzibur michayim? And that's going to be a machlokes tanoim. According to the Rabbanon, we're going to say don mina umina. And if we say don mina umina, we're going to say that just like in the case of the tnufa of Shalmi Yachid, it's after Shchita with only regard to the Chaz v'Shok. So too, in the same thing will apply to the tnufa of Shalmi Tzibur, and therefore the tnufa is going to be done liachar Shchita, like in the case of Shalmi Yachid, the tnufa is done on the Chaz v'Shok liachar Shchita. But according to Rebbe, we're going to apply the principle of Dom Minavi Uki Be'asra. And therefore, according to Rebbe, although we're going to derive from Shalmi Yochid, that Shalmi Tzibur, likewise, will require Tnufa. But that Tnufa is Uki V'Asra is going to be the Tnufa of Michayim. Okay, so now we finish this Amud.